And okay, let's get started. I don't want to take all too much of your time. Tonight's a really good topic. It's emotional eating, trying to get control of our cravings and understanding them. As I typically do, I take a fairly scientific approach here in the middle. So there might be a moment in the middle where you tune me out, and that's totally fine. For me, it helps me a lot to understand why my body is doing what it's doing when it's doing it, so then I can have better control over that. Before we dive in too much, how is the audio? Are we doing okay? Or should I try to reboot?
It's sounding better.
Okay. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm okay.
Okay, let's get started then. And as always, if you have questions along the way, please feel free to jump in or anything to say. Okay, so we're gonna talk about emotional eating versus hunger, true hunger eating, why we do it. Then we get into a little bit of the science, because no, you're not crazy. You actually are hungrier when you are emotional. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how we can potentially break that, because there are some tactics that we can use. It's very difficult to do, but there are ways that we can become more in tune with our own eating habits so that we can try to break the cycle. Okay, so emotional eating. Emotional eating is exactly as it sounds. We're consuming foods, typically in higher quantities of lower quality, in response to feelings instead of actual hunger, right? It's when we have some sort of emotional, we typically think about it as negative emotions, and we respond to those negative emotions by eating something that we know is not necessarily nutrient dense, but it provides kind of a good hit of joy. And we're eating out of emotion instead of hunger. It's important to understand that emotional eating is a response to a wide spectrum of emotions: stress, anxiety, frustration, anger, boredom. These are sort of the negative emotions that we typically associate this with, but we also emotional eat when we're happy or excited, right? We kind of live in a culture where we surround emotions or react to emotions with food, right? We're kind of taught that we can, or we form these habits where, like, in times of negative emotions, we can go have food, and that feels good, right? But we also tend to gather and celebrate things around food too, right? We celebrate holidays around food. We have these family gatherings around food. We got birthdays and there's food. When we go out with friends, there's typically some food component. So a lot of these things are done out of emotions. But when we're trying to eat in reaction of a negative emotion, it's a different approach than when we're eating out of a happy emotion. So this presentation is mostly based on why we turn to food when we're feeling negative emotions. All right, when we are eating emotionally, we tend to reach for the snacks, right? We're reaching for these highly palatable foods that are typically high in fat or sugar, the things that we consider maybe forbidden or off limits or whatever, junk, right? That's typically what we're doing when we're emotionally eating. And we tend to do it mindlessly, right? People, they say they do it and they don't feel like themselves, or they go on autopilot, or it's those moments where you reach for a bag and then poof, it's gone, like a bag of Doritos or something, and next thing you know, it's gone and you don't even remember going through it, right? It's almost this like, who was that person? That wasn't me. We go on autopilot. So we're going to talk a little bit about why that happens. How is it possible for us to reach for a bag of Doritos, eat the whole thing, and not even realize we're doing it until after the fact? Okay? Because that's real. That's actually a thing that happens. And then emotional eating is typically followed with negative feelings afterwards. We feel worse about our situation after we've realized what we've done. It often comes with feelings of guilt or shame. This idea like, I knew better. I know I didn't want to do that, but looking back on it, why did I do that, right? We kind of have this feeling of loss of control. Okay, so emotional eating, we're reacting, we kind of lose control in that reaction. And then we have this sense of like reflection where we feel bad about it because we knew better, and yet for some reason we did it anyway, right? So that's kind of emotional eating in a nutshell. Eating out of hunger is a response to hunger cues, right? Like we're really hungry, our stomach is growling, we get fatigued or lightheaded, we get that hangry feeling. Oh, the shame. Oh, the shame of, are you talking about of the emotional eating? Yes. Feeling worse about yourself. And then it's like this perpetual cycle, like, why did I do it? And then you do it again. Why did I do it? And then you do it again. You're like, why am I doing this? This self-sabotage idea. Oh man. And we'll talk about that too. So this is quite literally, you need fuel, right? Your body is saying, I need fuel to keep going. And it's interesting because if we're really eating in response to hunger, it's easier to opt for better choices. Like we often want better choices. We actually, our body is telling us that it needs nourishment. And so we understand that choosing better choices is better for us. It's easier for us to opt into better choices when we're not on autopilot and just trying to eat our emotions. So when you're trying to decide what am I like, am I trying to eat out of a reaction to an emotion, or if I'm truly hungry, one thing you can ask yourself is, well, okay, if I were to be offered a wholesome food here, would I feel satisfied? Or am I reaching for that Snickers because I just feel like crap right now and I really need a piece of joy in my life, right? If you feel like you'd be satisfied being offered wholesome food, typically that's an indicator that like, I'm actually hungry. My body's like craving something that it needs nourishment. Whereas if you would bypass carrots instead and you only want the Snickers, that's typically a good indicator, like, no, I'm eating out of emotion right now. Maybe I need to pause and back up. Right. So this is one thing that you can ask yourself when you're kind of like reaching for something, like, am I truly hungry? Like, would I be okay if somebody offered me a wholesome snack? Or no, I just want the Snickers because I want to feel a piece of joy, right? And I don't feel like I would be satisfied with wholesome food. Most of our cravings have very little to do with hunger. Okay? Typically, we have cravings for other reasons. It has nothing to do with being actually hungry. Their response to emotions, where this is where emotional eating comes from. Environments. Okay? It's like when we go to a movie theater and we're in the environment of being at a movie theater and all of a sudden we crave popcorn. You're like, I don't eat popcorn any other time. Why is it when I walk into this environment, all of a sudden I have to have popcorn, right? Because we've been triggered. We've taught ourselves that popcorn and movies go together. So when I'm watching a movie, I have a popcorn, and now that's the expectation that our body has. It's this unconscious pattern that we've created for ourselves. And so when we enter that environment, unconsciously, we're going to have this, oh, I'm in this environment, here's the pattern, the response is popcorn, right? And then they're also a response to hormonal imbalances. Sometimes we crave things because physically we actually need things, like our body is a little out of whack. And so this is things like, for example, women on their, women who experience menstrual cycles. There are reasons why going into that, you get cravings, things that are high in fat, right? Because fat supports our hormones. So when we're feeling a little bit out of whack, our body says, hey, I need some support. My hormones are a little crazy. Please provide me with fat. Those are real cravings. They're physical cravings because we have physical needs for them. And it's interesting. I was talking to a client about this, how like we tend to think that like when we're reaching for things in those hormonal states, when we're snacking on, when we're about to, enter a menstrual cycle, we're like, well, no, I typically am reaching for sugar. But recognize that a lot of the things that we're reaching for are also not just sugar heavy, but also fat heavy, right? Like if you're reaching for like a dark chocolate or a milk chocolate or anything, they have high fat contents too. If you're reaching for donuts, high sugar, also high fat. So we misunderstand what we're craving in those hormonal imbalances because often the things that we're reaching for have both. And we assume it's the sugar we're going for, when really it's our body saying, I actually need more fat right now. I'm feeling out of whack. Can you give me that? And so you respond with giving it something that's both sugar and high sugar, high fat. And that satisfies your craving. And you're saying that it was satisfied by the sugar component, but it's really the fat component of that. Am I making sense? Are there questions about that? It's kind of interesting. Like some of these cravings are absolutely induced by hormonal imbalances because our body needs them to help come back to balance. Yeah, perfect. All right, thanks, Sarah. All right, perfect. Okay. No, don't freeze on me now. Come on. Ugh, I need a better computer. One of these days when I'm rich and famous, I will buy a better computer. Okay. Emotional eating is the result of a domino effect. Okay, it doesn't happen that all of a sudden we've decided that we're going to emotional eat. There's lead up. There's typically lead up to what happens before we go into this kind of autopilot emotional eating behavior. There's a trigger, and that trigger is followed by an urge. Okay, we respond to that urge with a behavior, and as a result of that behavior, we get a reward. Okay, this is kind of the stream of events that happens before we are that kind of build up that causes emotional eating. And we often see this in terms of we have a stress. That stress creates a craving, and then we eat to satisfy the craving, and we get a hit of dopamine, right? This is kind of the domino effect. So stress, craving, eat, dopamine. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that from a biological perspective, our bodies want to be happy. They want to be content. Our brains are always searching for ways to be more comfortable, okay? So in times of stress, and this is both in physical stress and psychological stress, our body reacts the same. It is looking for a way to find joy through dopamine. And what we have done, whether it was intentional or not, is we have taught ourselves or trained ourselves that an easy way to get that hit of dopamine is to eat, right? Eating feels good. Eating brings joy. So in that moment, we've learned that stress makes us uncomfortable. And when our brain is always searching for a way to find more comfort. And we've trained our brain that we can find comfort in food. Now, that's not intentional, but that's part of the culture that we live in. We turn to food for everything, whether it be sadness, loneliness, boredom, happiness. So what we've trained our brain is that when you're uncomfortable and you want dopamine, we should crave food. Okay. Come on, don't fail me now. Let's go. So this is that endless cycle. Stress leads to craving, leads to eating, leads to dopamine, leads to regret, right? We end up just doing this over and over and over again. We get these cravings, and then we do this unconscious eating, and that brings us that slight joy. And then we look back on ourselves and we go, why did I do that? And then we get regretful, and then we get some more stress, and right, this endless cycle. I think this is what I was just saying. Like when we feel negative emotion, our brains immediately search for solution. It wants relief. Okay? And we have taught ourselves that food is relief. This is a learned behavior. It's deep rooted. It's a habit we've created for ourselves. It's this idea of instant gratification. Okay. So this is kind of, why it's happening. Okay, this is definitely one of those biological things. Our brain is really trying to make us comfortable in some way. And and it always wants to do it in the path of least resistance. And we've shown it that even though, food is not the only way to bring joy in a moment, we've taught ourselves through habits, many years of habits, that food is an easy way to bring joy in the moment. Now, is it a solution? No. And typically we end up on the other side of this emotional eating, and we're like, why did I do that? And we feel like more negative feelings about ourselves. And it just kind of feeds this cycle. Oh my gosh. Oh, go back. Okay. So it is important to understand that humans are creatures of reward-driven habits, okay? And we're also driven by patterns, right? So we fall onto habits, or we go into this kind of autopilot in times of duress. Okay, now why is that? It makes sense. When our bodies get stressed out, the first thing our brain tries to do is find comfort. Okay, now when it's trying to do that, we tend to go on autopilot because that's less taxing on our brain. Okay. When we go on autopilot, we fall on the habits that we have been doing over and over and over again. That's what autopilot is. We have, listen, when I'm faced with this stressor, I have decided the best way to deal with that is to eat this food. So now when I'm dealing with that stressor and our body goes into autopilot because it's less taxing on our brain to think about what's going on and instead just fall into our pattern. We're pattern-based beings, and we operate in patterns. So when we end up in the same situation over and over and over again, and we respond to it over and over and over again, we are deepening our body's autopilot response every single time we do that. If you react to the stressor in the same way over and over again, we're deepening that habit. And so it makes it easier for our body to go on autopilot. This is why when people say, I just lost myself, or I don't know what happened, or I look back on it and I don't even remember doing it, it's because our body went on autopilot. It's that like animalistic need to do something with the least amount of effort, and that means that we're falling into habits. This is exactly what we're designed to do. Okay. Now, the interesting thing about this is that our system, the system that we have to deal with stress, it evolved in an environment that was primarily physical stress, in an environment that did not have an abundance of food. Okay, so our system that evolved to deal with stress evolved to deal with physical stress and not a lot of food. However, that very same system that deals with stress now, well, think about our environments now. Our primary stressors are not physical, they're psychological. And we don't have an abundance of food, we have an abundance of food, easy access and psychological, okay? But our systems didn't develop in that environment. And so the way that our systems work is to respond to physical stressors, not psychological stressors. So our bodies respond to physical stressors the same way it responds is to psychological stressors. Why does that matter? Let's get into the science of what's going on when we're stressed out and why all of a sudden we feel like we're starving when we're super stressed out. Okay, so this is the sciencey part. You can tune me out if you want. I think it's really interesting. I think it really helps us understand our bodies. Okay, our first reaction to spontaneous stress is adrenaline. It's that fight or flight. Okay, now this suppresses appetite. Now, bear with me. Okay, we're just going to pretend that we are living with dinosaurs. I fully recognize that humans and dinosaurs did not share the same space and time, but just bear with me, okay? We're walking, and all of a sudden we get surprised by a T-Rex. It would not make sense in that moment for us to look at the T-Rex, get super stressed out, and think, I think right about now I need a grape. I think it would be very good for me right now in this moment. I think I should stop and slow down and eat. Right? That doesn't make sense. So instead what happens is our body releases adrenaline and suppresses appetite. It says, we don't have time. We don't have time to eat. We've got to either fight what's happening or we have to fly away, right? We got to run. We got to get away from the stressor, right? So our body suppresses appetite and makes you have a lot of energy so that you can either, again, fight T-Rex or run from him. Those are your options. You're going to fight him or you're going to run. Once you reach safety, the second wave of these hormones is cortisol. And cortisol is released to now help deal with that stressor. It actually helps stimulates memory, right? This is one of those reasons why, like, when you get super embarrassed or something goes terribly wrong and you get super stressed out, you like always remember that because cortisol is released. Now that makes sense. From an evolutionary perspective, you want to remember the times that made you uncomfortable, that gave you stress, so that you can learn from those experiences so you can handle them better next time. So after we get ourselves in a safer place, this cortisol, core memory, right? So you can learn from it. And it also prompts the hormone ghrelin, which is the appetite inducing hormone. Because remember, your initial response was to fight or flight. These are both physical responses. And so now we've got to be hungry so we can replenish those energy stores. Remember, these systems evolved in an environment where our main stressors were physical and food was not abundant. So this is a direct consequence of that. Our first initial reaction to stress is to fight or flight, both physical, and then to release cortisol, which stimulates ghrelin, which says you're hungry, go eat. Replenish all the energy you just used to fight or fly away. So this chronic, and in our reaction to chronic stress, psychological stress, it's the same thing. But what it's doing instead, because we are chronically stressed, right? We've got stress from work and stress at home and stress here and there and everywhere. It's not purely physical anymore. It's psychological, which means it stays with us a lot longer. We have elevated cortisol levels, and this creates this extended feeling of hunger. How are we doing? Questions? A little bit mind-blowing. Okay, so cortisol is released, which says you're hungry, go eat. Okay, so it's not just in your mind when you're like, no, I know I'm so stressed out, I'm so hungry. Yeah, your body is trying to help you deal with that stress. And it's perceiving our psychological stress the very same way it's perceiving our physical stress. So you can see the problem here is that our bodies are trying to replenish energy that we didn't actually use. So that's a problem, right? Now, not only does cortisol like prompt ghrelin, which is our, yeah, you're hungry, it also reduces our response to leptin, and that's the hormone that says you're hungry. So it kind of shuts that down. So stress makes you feel hungry and also doesn't make you feel full. It overrides your true hunger cues. It makes it very hard for us to distinguish, am I really hungry? I'm not really sure. My hormones are everywhere. Okay. Do I need to eat? I'm not actually sure. Am I full? I don't know. Okay. Our hormones are messed up in response to our stress. And if we're chronically stressed, then our hormones are chronically messed up. Okay. And this is where we get into the animalistic. We go onto autopilot. All of a sudden, we ate the entire bag of Doritos. We have no idea what happened. And I know I shouldn't have done that, but I wasn't full and it didn't stop and nothing cute. And what's going on? Oh, you're stressed. And those hormones all over the place. And they're trying to help you recover from a physical incident that never happened. Questions? Our bodies are complicated and beautiful, and unfortunately they can't evolve as quickly as our environment has evolved, right? Again, these systems were created in an environment where our stresses were physical and food wasn't abundant, and now we're living in an environment where our stressors are psychological and food is everywhere. Okay, so those are kind of at conflict with one another. Not only does cortisol up the ghrelin and down the leptin, it also impacts the way that we store energy, and it also has us reach for like density, like energy dense foods. Like we've trained ourselves that we can get a quick dopamine hit when we reach for comforting foods. And when you think of comforting foods, these are typically foods that are not all that nutrient dense, right? So we're hungry. We don't have the ability to tell when we're not hungry. And now we're reaching for foods that are purely energy dense to combat a physical situation that never happened. Okay, and one more and. And on top of that, there's this genetic piece that some of us release more cortisol based on the severity of the stressor. So some of us are predisposed to having stronger hunger cues in the face of stress, right? Like there are definitely some people out there who are like, no, I don't feel the urge to eat when I'm stressed. They just have less, like a less strong of a cortisol response to stressors. Okay, some of us, our genetics are just like stress, release the cortisone, right? Now you're like, I'm hungry, but I don't know how to stop. Right? This is all biological. Okay, questions. How are we doing? Woofed. And also, like, I know that, oh, I guess I had another one, and and cortisol does impact the way we store energy, right? Because cortisol is that second release of hormones after a stressor, right? The first one is adrenaline. You have to fight or flight, get safe. And then cortisol is like, okay, now that we're safe, we're going to start repairing and we're going to replenish the energy. So because it wants you to replenish the energy that you apparently use in your fight or flight, right? Now it's going to encourage fat storage. It wants you to replenish that energy stores, okay? And unfortunately, again, these systems developed when we were dealing with physical stress, and now we're dealing with psychological stress. Our systems deal with it the same way, and that physical component has been removed. So now the cortisol is like, store all the energy. And you're like, yeah, but I didn't actually use any physical energy. I'm just emotionally exhausted, right? These are not, yes, that's why you lose your mind. Yes, because you're stressed. Oh, the donuts. Okay, so cortisol is very powerful, and I don't want anybody to walk away and be like, damn you, cortisol. It's really actually a very important hormone. Like I said, it helps trigger memories. It helps us learn after we are able to calm down and look back and reevaluate and assess. Cortisol is the reason that we just don't keel over and die when we get spooked from like a spider, right? Like, could you imagine if you saw a spider, got spooked, and then you died because your body couldn't handle the shock, right? So cortisol is incredibly important, but again, it evolved in an environment that we no longer live in. And so we're often at odds with it trying to heal our bodies, right? Because it's trying to do its job, but we're never giving it a break because we're chronically stressed. Okay. So we gotta break the cycle. Okay, we know that there's this endless cycle, stress, and then craving, and then respond to it by eating, and then we get that dopamine hit, and then like it's that craving to that eating part of this cycle where we tend to go on autopilot and we kind of lose consciousness of what we're doing, and then we get that dopamine hit, we get back to our body feels a little bit safer, and then you're able to turn around and look back at yourself and be like, why? I know better. Okay, so how do we break that? So if you're looking at this cycle, stress is never going to go away. Right? We learn how to deal with stress in more efficient ways. Okay? We have to learn how to deal with stress in more healthy ways, but the triggers will always be there, right? You're always going to have job stress, or you're going to have, there's going to be stress from your kids or from your partner or what have you. So there's not a whole lot that we can do with that part of this cycle, except for, of course, learn how to deal with our stressors in a healthy way. And those stressors are biologically going to create cravings. That's what we are supposed to do, right? Because our bodies are trying to respond to that stress as if it were a physical stressor. Okay? It responds to physical and psychological stressors the same way. So if we're going to get those cravings, it's the step between the craving and the eating part where we go into autopilot to try to get that dopamine hit. That's really where we need to try to stop and pause. That's where we can try to break that cycle. Okay, so learning how to deal with the triggers, recognizing that those triggers are going to give you a craving, and then being able to stop and pause and be like, okay, do I need to move forward with this, or is there a different way to deal with it? So breaking the cycle, we'll get to some ideas here in just a minute, but breaking the cycle is behavioral change. It is hard. Okay, if it weren't hard, then we would all look and feel exactly the way we wanted to, right? Behavioral change is hard. And when our body reverts to this autopilot idea to decrease the taxation on our brain, we are pattern-based creatures. And whether or not we meant to, we've created patterns in our habits. We've trained our bodies that we can turn to food as a quick hit of joy. So what we have to do is we have to somehow resist this predictability. We have to resist the autopilot so that we can move these actions from unconsciousness to consciousness. Okay, we have to somehow break the cycle at that, that craving to eating, so that we can make a conscious decision to either eat or not. When we can move things and stop autopilot, where we resist this predictability, where we break the pattern, when we move things from unconscious behavior to the conscious behavior, we have a lot more power over what we're about to do. Okay. So one thing that we need to do is we have to recognize these patterns. Emotional eating, like I said before, emotional eating is a result of patterns. Okay? It's often something that we can see coming if we recognize our triggers. Okay? This is where something like journaling can help. Sometimes you're not aware of the things that trigger you. Sometimes you're not aware that something that happened 3 hours ago is going to lead to an emotional eating like episode later in the day. So journaling, when you go through an episode of emotional eating and you're on the other side looking back going, why did I do that? This is a prime opportunity for you to take some notes, right? Be your own health detective. Okay, what happened today? What happened a few hours before that? What was I doing at that moment? What was I thinking? How was I feeling? Okay, what did I grab for? How much of it did I grab for? Was I with anybody or was I alone? How did I feel after? And it seems like, why would you do that? Because here's the thing, once you start doing this, once you start trying to recognize what happened in my day to start the trigger, what did I reach for? How much did I eat? Was I alone or was I with people? And how did I feel after? You can start, you do that every time you are on the other side of an emotional eating episode, right? You write it all down and you start finding patterns, okay? Why are these things happening? And I know it seems like, oh man, there's so much we can learn about ourselves. There's a lot of evidence in the patterns of our daily lives that will allow us to make recognitions later to disrupt those patterns. Okay. Then once you're able to move these unconscious behaviors to conscious ones, then you have the power to pause and really ask yourself, is this something that I really want? Do I really want to eat this whole bag of Doritos, for example? Or can I just eat a few and be okay, right? Or how am I feeling right now? What is my initial reaction to my emotional state? Okay, am I going to be satisfied with real food or am I trying to push down an emotion with some sort of dopamine hit from something that's not very nutritious? Okay, how is this going to make me feel later? If this is going to make me feel shame or regret later, do I really want to engage in this behavior? Okay. Is this a decision that a healthy person would make? And I'm not saying healthy just physical. I'm saying an all-around deep health type person who's got a good relationship with food. What I'm about to do, is this something that a healthy person would do? Okay. Give yourself time to think through it. It's time to resist. Remember, what you're trying to do is resist the autopilot. So any disruption of that pattern, anything that can make you pause and think, shoot, is this what I want to do? That can take you off autopilot. All we need to do is disrupt the pattern. We are just trying to move these actions from unconscious to conscious. And to do that, we have to find a way to disrupt it. Okay? We have to disrupt this pattern. And sometimes just taking 5 minutes can be enough to make the craving go away. Here's the other thing though. If you decide after 5 minutes, like you've processed it, you're very well aware of what you're going to do, you want whatever it is you're reaching for, okay, that's fine. And here's why that's fine. Because you've made a conscious decision now. It is not failure for you to pause, think it through, and still move forward with that action every once in a while. That's not failure, that's feedback. Okay, that is you moving this decision from unconsciousness to consciousness. That's not failure. You're now making this with full intent. Okay, now you're aware. So you're not going to come from it on the other side and say, what was I thinking? You're like, oh, I know what I was thinking. Okay, I was thinking that I was an emotional wreck and I needed emotional support at that time. And so that took priority over my physical health. And that's okay. Okay, it's not failure, it's feedback. The other thing that you can do after this, like if you decide to proceed, is it gives you the ability to compare. In this moment, I wasn't able to resist. I still moved forward with that decision. Whereas the last time something happened, I was able to resist. What was the difference? So you can start learning about your own willpowers or whatever motivates you in that way too. Like, okay, what I realized is that the stress that I carry with me from work, I'm able to find other ways to deal with that when instead of like reaching for food. But when I get into an argument with my significant other, that's a little more overwhelming to me, and I find more comfort in food in that situation, right? So recognizing what actually drives you to the brink versus what are some things that you can actually handle in a more like in other ways. Okay, so recognizing that like still engaging in some of these behaviors sometimes. Yeah, well, these are good. Yeah, so Victoria says these are good quit smoking tips too, and it's because it's all behavior based, right? Recognizing our behavior and finding ways to stop the cycle. Eating too much, binge eating, emotional eating, smoking, alcoholism, like these are all very similar things where we just have to figure out how to break the cycle. The one thing, let's see, is that what's the next one? Is it the tips one? Okay. Oh, whoa, sorry, too fast. The one thing that I want to say here is that it's okay if you take a minute to pause, recognize that you still want to move forward and do so. We have 3 different types of health, okay? And deep health is health in every category. It's physical health, it's psychological health, and it's social health, okay? And sometimes a decision that supports one is at odds with the other. And it's okay to make choices of priority in the moment. The hope here is that you're doing it with intent. We're moving our behaviors from unconscious, stopping the autopilot, pausing, and making a conscious decision. If you, for example, here's an example where it's not necessarily physical health, but it's supporting maybe some psychological health for you in the moment. Let's say you had a rough day at work, very stressful. You come home, your house is a disaster. You're walking into a hurricane, right? And then, maybe you have like, you don't want to make dinner and maybe your kids are fighting or your husband's, giving you attitude, whatever, right? And you're just not in a good mental state. And you decide, it would be really good right now if I could just unwind. And I would really like a glass of wine. So in that moment, you want to use wine as a way to help you unwind from a pretty chaotic day. That would be an example of something that supports your psychological health, but not your physical health. And in that moment, if you're prioritizing your psychological health by winding down with a glass of wine, fine, that's okay, right? But the point is you're doing that with intent, right? It's not this unconscious, you open up the bottle and just drink straight from it, right? Like all of a sudden the bottle's gone, you're like, what happened? It's like, no, I definitely want to unwind with this glass of wine. I'm going to feel good about the decision on the other side. No shame, no guilt. I haven't failed. I'm just choosing my psychological health first, and that's okay. But the difference is that one is purposeful and one is not. Okay. So how do we disrupt this pattern? Because that's the hardest part, right? It's not, you have to first of all recognize it's happening, and sometimes that in and of itself is the hardest part. But that's why journaling can help if you want to try to recognize your triggers. Okay, I'll give you an example about myself. I am very triggered by grading, which I know is almost laughable because I teach, and that's like an important piece of this whole thing is I have to grade, I have to give student feedback, but it stresses me out. Okay, and so what I recognized I started doing is that because I hate grading so much, I used to sit down with my papers and my pen and an entire bag of apple chips. And before I was done grading, I would have eaten the entire bag of apple chips. It wasn't on purpose. I just wanted something that would bring me joy while I was doing this task that I didn't want to do. Okay. So that was unconscious behavior. I ate the whole thing and I would eat the whole thing and be like, what happened? I don't know. So what I did, I just made a deal with myself. And I said, okay, you have to grade. There's no way around it. So don't bring the bag with you. Just bring a bowl. And when the bowl is done, you're done. So you can spread out that joy as much as you want, or you can eat the whole thing on the first paper, but when the bowl's done, right? Don't eat the whole thing. So for me, I recognize that, look, this thing triggered me. I still wanted to somehow bring joy to that moment. And so I found a way to do it in a healthier way, where I just wasn't unconsciously eating the whole time. Another thing you can do is change the environment. You just called me sorry, them apple chips, they be good. You can change the environment. Okay, so that can take on a whole lot of things. That could be just physically moving into a different room. Okay? That could be going outside. That could be rearranging your kitchen. It could be changing where you keep your snacks. So this is an interesting one. If you go on autopilot and your snacks are always in that cupboard on the left-hand side of the stove, okay, and in your state of autopilotness, I know it's not a word, but we're gonna run with it, you go and you open up that cabinet on the left side of the stove and they're not there, you have reason to pause now. Something's different, you've broken the pattern. So if your snacks aren't where they used to be, now you have to pause and be like, oh shoot, first of all, where are my snacks? Oh yeah, I moved them. Oh yeah, is this something, now you've broken the pattern, you can pause. Oh, do I really want to do this? I don't know. How am I feeling? Is this a response to, right? And then going back to, is this a response to an emotion? Am I going to feel bad about this later? All it takes sometimes is just a brief break so that you can pause and think, am I doing what I really want to be doing? I don't know about that. Okay, so you can change your environment. And the other thing is change the reward. We have taught ourselves that food is an easy dopamine hit, right? Our brains like the path of least resistance, okay? But unfortunately, we want to resist it. That's exactly, we're trying to create resistance, but our brain is still wanting the path of least resistance. Oh, good. Victoria says the cabinet thing 100% works. Moving the snacks and putting healthy choices in the snack cupboard is 100% how I function. That's awesome. Just keep moving them. Right? This month they're in this cabinet, that month they're over there. Okay. But yeah, our brains immediately go to the path of least resistance. That's how we function. Okay. And we have unfortunately taught it, and it's like kind of a cultural societal standard that food is an easy reward. Okay? But it's not the only one, and it's not the only way to bring joy in that moment, and it's not the only way to get a dopamine hit. So really remember what's going on is that your brain is just trying to find comfort, and it's finding comfort through joy, through trying to get a dopamine hit. There are several ways that you can make that happen that can remove the urge entirely. So find something that brings you joy, and it doesn't have to be anything big. It can be like going on a walk. It can be taking a quick shower or washing your face. It can be taking time out to read a book or doing a hobby that you really like, knitting. Maybe you just want to knit for 5 minutes. It can be putting on your favorite song just to distract you from whatever it is that's stressing you out, or dancing, right? Put on your favorite song and dance for 5 minutes. Right? I don't know a single person who has gone on the other side of dancing for 5 minutes and been like, what have I done? Whereas I know a lot of people who get on the other side of an emotional eating episode and go, what have I done? Right? Nobody's going to be upset that they danced for 5 minutes. So you just have to find a way to bring joy in that moment, to give your brain that dopamine hit so it stops the craving. Does that make sense? Because that's all you're trying to do. And unfortunately, we tend to do it with food, which just brings more stress and regret and shame later. So just replace that dopamine hit with something that isn't going to create that same sort of like shame afterwards. Whew. Okay, questions, comments, concerns. I have no idea what time it is. I'm trying to keep these shorter. I don't mean for them to be as long as they are, but I get talky. I apologize. All right, does this make sense? Okay, so recognize that there's a real biological reason why we respond the way that we do, and understanding that our body is responding in a way that we had a physical stressor, even if it's psychological. And so no, even though our hunger cues do go up when we're stressed, recognize like, oh no, my body's trying to replenish this energy that I didn't actually expend. I need to find a different way to make it feel comfortable, right? So maybe that's dancing or listening to music or taking 10 minutes out of a book or something like that. And, whew. All right, questions. Okay. Well, as always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to PM me. I'm more than happy to address those. Maybe you'll rearrange your cupboards tonight as if you didn't have enough on your plate. Yeah, and good luck. I know emotional eating is very difficult. It's a behavior change, okay? But it's something that with a concerted effort, if you can break that pattern, sometimes all it takes is a quick break for you to recognize you don't want to do what you're going to do, find a different alternative. Okay. All right, guys, have a great night. I'll see you next time. Eat more, eat well, eat happy. Bye.